We're embarking upon a new era in business because the profit at all costs model of business just isn't working. We know there are businesses that do good, equally focused on the benefits to people and the planet as much as they are on profit, but who's keeping track? Is there one resource consumers can go to where we can find out about these companies and the principles and practices they operate by? The short answer to this question is yes. Greetings, everyone. I'm Stephen Donaco, Program Director of the Conscious Business Enterprise, Division of Humanities team. In this Living in Oneness program, I'm honored to speak with Andrew Hewitt, founder of GameChangers. GameChangers is an organization that finds and ranks the top for-benefit businesses in the world, shares their world-class practices, and uses gaming dynamics to enroll organizations in the for-benefit model of business. In today's discussion, we'll take a deeper look into GameChangers' mission to create a critical mass of for-benefit businesses in every major city in the world, and then also understand how GameChangers itself is evolving to expand that mission. So, in 2010, Andrew Hewitt had the idea to replace the Fortune 500 with a ranking of the world's top purpose-driven companies, which eventually became GameChangers 500. This work received much fanfare from media such as the BBC World News and Forbes, and it led Andrew to share his research at premier institutions such as Harvard, the United Nations University for Peace, and the Social Entrepreneurship World Forum. Through this intensive research journey, Andrew was invited to join over 180 thought leaders in business to form the Fourth Sector Mapping Initiative, an advisory council to guide the global advancement of for-benefit enterprises. As a result, GameChangers has been built to act as a searchable global database of for-benefit businesses, their practices, and the experts who support their growth. So, Andrew Hewitt, welcome to Living in Oneness. It's good to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here, Stephen.
So, what was your inspiration for creating GameChangers?
Well, it started when I attended an Awakening the Dreamer symposium hosted by the Pachamama Alliance while living in my hometown of Calgary, Canada. That was back in like 2007. And for the first time, I felt like I understood the core problem. You know, I'd been feeling overwhelmed with environmental devastation, social injustice, all the things. But what was mine to do, you know, and how could I actually make a meaningful difference? And so that symposium really gave me a sense of empowerment, and so I could take a stand and really make an impact. And so that began the journey of inquiry and really standing in this place of like, how do we change the dream of the modern world, which is really the mission of the Pachamama Alliance, and to change the dream of success. And that's what I was seeing with my university friends who'd graduated and started climbing, you know, the ladders of big corporations, pursuing a definition of success that they hadn't more deeply evaluated. And I was doing the same. I was buying real estate. I was, you know, building passive income streams, building different businesses, also programmed by a certain worldview of success. But in my heart, I felt like a deep call of service. And it occurred to me that the large majority of my friends that were working at these big corporations were really unhappy. And not only that, they were powering some of the most destructive companies on the planet. And that there was a few who were experienced joy and meaning in their lives. And they were working at organizations that were purpose-driven, not necessarily just charities, but organizations that had amazing company cultures. You know, organizations like Tom's or Google were some of the early examples, or Patagonia. And I could taste this bubbling movement of, you know, whatever we want to call it, right? Purpose-driven companies, social enterprises, B Corps. It was just starting to take off in a new way. And for me, I felt really inspired to find those organizations around the world and help publish a database of those organizations, so people who were either inspired to build these companies could find examples to follow, or like my college friends, could find organizations to work at that aligned with their personal mission. And that's where it all began.
Nice. Yeah, and I can relate to that as well as somebody who worked in the typical corporate America environment, and just feeling that, feeling that call or that tug or whatever it is to want to have more meaning in that world. So great that you came to it that way and you were inspired in that way. So how would you define what we might call a for-benefit business or a purpose-driven business, or by whatever name people are calling it these days?
Yeah, there's a lot of names and it creates confusion in this whole space. And the term that I've chosen to use over the years is for benefit, as what's happening, at least in the US, but it's becoming a global thing, is we're moving from this kind of like Wild West, not well-defined space to one that's more legally defined. And so we live in a world with three sectors. These capitalist countries, you have for-profits, you have nonprofits, and you have government organizations. And we've assumed that if we grow the economy, we grow these traditional for-profit businesses, they'll donate to nonprofits, they'll give taxes to governments, and the world should work, right? And we now know that that's actually not the case. The global problems are accelerating at a much faster pace than the solutions. And so there's just not enough money and resource to really solve the issues that we face through this three-sector economy. And so what for benefit represents is a new fourth sector, where it's defined like a nonprofit, where there's a primary commitment to a purpose beyond profit, obviously. But like a for-profit, it generates revenue, the majority of its revenue. So it's like a hybrid between like the revenue generating engine of a for-profit and the heart of a nonprofit. And that's essentially the primary characteristics that defines a for-benefit enterprise. And within that fourth sector, you find a whole spectrum of these types of organizations that you could call social enterprises or certified B corporations or benefit corporations, a new legal status in the USA. And what's incredible is that we're moving to more federal level legislation. So just like the nonprofit sector is honored at the federal level of government, and there's a tax code that's associated to it, that's the next frontier, is to have the sector form and be very clearly defined. And so that's what I term as for benefit. It's not my term. It's a term that, I've been a part of a 180 plus person advisory council and guiding these definitions, learning a lot from people who've been doing this a lot longer than I have. And it's a really exciting time.
Yeah. And so would you spend a moment to talk a little bit more about the 180 thought leaders that you joined in the four sector mapping initiative, and how that's, how you came to that, and then also how that's continued to enhance or refine your mission in doing this work? Sure.
So when I started with this ambitious idea of let's replace the Fortune 500, let's create a ranking of the world's top, purpose-driven companies that genuinely care. And I found myself in this place of needing to figure out how to rank those companies. And it turned out to be incredibly hard, right? Because impact or benefit, these are really subjective terms. And so this started this huge process, and me recruiting interns to come join me in Costa Rica, where I took over a boutique hotel and resourcefully found a way to attract top talent to just start this research process with me. And we went through many iterations of learning how to do this and really coming to this place of there's no holy grail of impact metrics. What's really happening here, it's people are having a shift in consciousness. They want to bring love into the world through their business. And there's so many ways that you can care through commerce, that you can care for people, for the planet. And so trying to limit that to any sort of perfect metric system just wasn't right. And so we arrived at badges like merit badges that we would award companies if they were showcasing leadership in different categories. And in doing that, we were able to create a more simplified way of differentiating companies without getting too in the minutia of like trying to numerically order impact. And so in that process, my work was discovered, so to speak, by people that had been doing this a lot longer than I have. And it started with a conference at Harvard where we all gathered, and leadership formed, and people from bipartisan support within the federal government came involved, and it's been this ongoing journey of working to properly define the boundaries of this fourth sector. And so it's been quite the ride.
And you continue to be involved in that with that group?
Yeah. And in fact, it's informed how I've been ranking companies, right? And it took me from a lot of experimentation to having a lot more rigor in just how we define the space, while also standing in what I feel is my role, which was simplifying all this, because it can get really technical and legal and numerical with metrics. And so I wanted to just make it really simple. So when you ask somebody, how do you be a business that just produces benefit for all life, that they'd have a simple map to follow, and then they wouldn't get too caught up in the legal structures or minutia, but it could be informed by that depth of rigor. And that's essentially what my mission has been.
Okay. Yeah. And I had noticed when I was browsing through your website, and you talked about those badges, right? So an example of some of those are like purpose first. So it's an organization with purpose, I'm assuming. They offer benevolent benefits, employee growth ecosystem, tribe culture. I mean, these are some examples of those badges. And is there, I'm assuming there's some sort of assessment behind each of those so that you can come to a conclusion that company in essence has earned that badge?
That's right. Yeah. And it's gone through many iterations, from companies filling out long surveys to a team researching those companies. So, I mean, this has been the task at hand, and a really challenging one, frankly. And so we managed to get up to a sizable database of companies that have been evaluated based on those badges. And so it's a great resource where if you want to go and learn what companies are doing, you can do that. I mean, there's still a lot more work to do in being able to properly showcase what companies are doing across all of these areas. And while it's a challenging initiative, it feels like a really meaningful one. And so I've been resilient through the last 8 years in pursuing this mission. Yeah.
Well, and we're grateful to have you doing it for sure, and Humanity's team with our conscious business enterprise. I mean, I completely understand the devotion to it, and just happy and grateful that you're doing the work, because it is so important, and that resiliency is key. Because let me go back to something you had said a few minutes ago with respect to the word love and business. And it's something like a generation ago, there's no way that the L word, if we want to call it that, would have been ever muttered in business. I mean, people there would have been an instant resistance to it. So, how have you, how do you talk about the principle of love in business? And I would imagine that you come across resistance in some quarters to that. How do you bring that in a way that it makes sense, and that it actually resonates with people who might be skeptical about it?
Yeah, this has been a line I've trotted. So, I mean, when the movement was early, it seemed like the best thing to do was to bring more awareness to these types of organizations. And while where we are at now, in my perspective, is that we hit a tipping point where the younger generation gets it. They know this movement exists. We have things like B Corp certification that's doing a fantastic job of bringing more awareness. We now have benefit corporations as a legal state by state entity. And so there's been lots of positive awareness. And I think I contributed to that too with the GameChangers 500 ranking that we did. And then what happened, what I saw was that because it was the new cool, it attracts ego. It attracts people not necessarily for the right reasons. And it became about checklists and getting certifications and being seen a certain way. And that wasn't what the impulse was from the early pioneers. The impulse of the early pioneers was they just genuinely cared. And they didn't try to be a part of any sort of social group. They were just doing it because they cared, that they loved. And so the edge I've run up against in this work is finding a lot of companies. I get called by a lot of big corporations that want to move into this space. But what I'm sensing is that it's not for the reasons that create the transformation, right? And so, I mean, this has brought me in a journey to own that if we're really going to change the game of business, we need personal change too. The inner change allows for the outer change. And so really calling that in and not being afraid to use the word love. And if, I mean, I was, I was starting to put on events and marketing those events around the business case for purpose and like why this is great for your bottom line. But then I attracted in people that weren't doing it for the right reasons, right? And so, I mean, it's an interesting challenge. And I think it's a responsibility for those who are fortunate to be able to feel love in themselves and bring that into the world, to really stand in that truth that this is actually what's really happening. And this is why employees feel safe at work. This is why they become more productive. It's all about that shift in consciousness, or that sense of love in yourself that allows these types of organizations to really bloom.
Yeah, sure. And I worked for a time in the public relations industry, so I get that there's that what's the thing that we have to do to make ourselves look good kind of idea, and it's not necessarily sincere. There's a hidden agenda, and it sounds like you bump up against that. So if a company is going to use love as a principle, it really truly has to be from like within, like each individual.
Yeah.
Practicing that, and not just like we're going to just put a slogan on the wall and it'll look good to everybody on the outside.
Yeah. And Stephen, this has been part of my evolution within this organization that I've been building. Is I think we did a great job of spreading awareness and helping codify the model in a way that was more easy to understand. And then as I've been sitting in this place of like recognition that it's really the personal transformation that allows the organizational transformation, that I've been in this shift of really finding the game changers, the people. I've never referred to the companies as game changers. They're for benefit organizations, but it's the people who are changing the game. And so I've been on this journey of really uniting those people and supporting those people and going deeper into their own transformation and bonding with each other, as I feel that's the underlying culture that allows new types of organizations to form. And so that's been a big shift, and it's taken a lot of courage to move away from one model and start leaning into a new one, where, I mean, it's like a constant change in my theory of change, of how we're actually going to really change the game of business. And so that's where I've been standing over this last year.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Yeah. So you're evolving your own approach, your own thinking, your own, it just sounds like the work's gotten deeper for you as it's become more about the inner self.
Yeah. And it's also recognizing that, I mean, now I've had 10 years of watching these organizations, right? And what I've seen is a lot of incredible, genuinely caring founders build these organizations, and then they have to bring in more capital, or they get kicked out of their company, or they leave their company, and then it slingshots back to a more traditional version of capitalism. Mm-hmm. And it's just been disheartening. And so, or as they scale, I mean, they or maybe they go public, they start operating more like a machine. And I mean, this isn't true for all organizations, but it has left me in this deep inquiry of, wow, like, I mean, are we really creating the impact that we know in our heart is needed? And are
Yeah.
we really actually changing the game of business, or is it becoming, sugarcoating? And so a lot of my inquiry recently has been, how do we go from, I would say, how do we actually change the game dynamics so that the behaviors are consistent? So, I mean, so this is where, I mean, the name even GameChangers came in, was recognizing game theory, and that traditional for-profit businesses are known as a win-lose game, or a finite game, a game that ends, a game with winners and losers, a game you play to win. And as long as that's how it's structured, then you create behaviors in people, even if they're great human beings and really care. It creates incentives for things that separate us as human beings, or cause us to compete, or cause us to sell the organization when it's really on a history-making mission. And so I've been studying, like, what are those underlying game dynamics that, when you shift, actually holds the organization to its purpose, that it creates a culture that really cares for people, that really cares for the planet, despite what happens. And we call that a win-win game, or an infinite game, a game you play for the sake of enjoyment. And so that these are the deeper layers I've been uncovering. And I mean, our badges were are an indication of some of those game dynamics that shift. And there's another layer deeper than that technologies like blockchain are enabling, that are really exciting.
Yeah. Can you name a couple of companies that you feel are playing the evolved game?
The infinite game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where do you see that? Like, where do you see that happening now in the business?
So Dr. Bronner's, I mean, their mission is all one. We're all one, right? Talk about oneness, the theme of this series. So they sell soap, but they do a few things to shift game dynamics. For example, they cap salaries at 5x living wage. So the very lowest you'll be paid is living wage, and people get paid more than that. Nobody's going to earn more than 5x that. And so what that does is it prevents perverse incentive. It prevents somebody wanting to capture more control. So it's more likely to stay in a win-win structure. And what it also does is it allows all that excess profit that's not going to pay executives a crazy amount of money to flow back into the mission. And then as a tribe, as they consider themselves, they get to decide what to do with that money, and how they can reinvest that money or donate that money in a way that links to their mission of all one. And so their team, their tribe, gets so much more than a paycheck. They're playing the infinite game because they're being able to give, and feel their heart, and really feel connected to the mission. So that's one, small example that I love from Dr. Bronner's.
And they've been around for a while. I mean, Dr. Bronner's is not like a company that just started a year or two ago. I mean, they've been selling soap for a long time.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I don't know how many years, but decades and decades. They're proving that they're playing the infinite game, because they've sustained their culture. They've sustained their mission. They're playing business this way because it's enjoyable. They're not trying to win or beat or outcompete. They're just bringing genuine care through their business into the world.
Yeah. And there's something about that. So playing the game, and playing a game where, for the enjoyment of it, versus just for the sake of winning it. Like as you speak to all of this, I just feel this shift around playing a game for being much more than just the winner take all.
And to do that, I mean, there's structural things to set up, like incentives, your legal structure to kind of keep your mission or purpose locked in. what you measure. I mean, are you measuring quarterly earnings as the primary metric, or like Dr. Bronner's and other companies like that, they have an annual impact report. And so they're tracking their impact on all stakeholders, really like it's a sport, right? Year after year, measuring their progress across environmental, social, and financial metrics. And then if you look into their cultures, I mean, they're creating a culture that genuinely cares about people. So those people, when they come to work, they feel safe. They're not acting out of fear. They are playing the game for the sake of enjoyment. And of course, that creates a level of commitment and devotion and passion that is arguably a huge reason for their success.
Yeah. So all of those metrics, right? So all of those things that you were mentioning that they're measuring, it's not just to hit numbers, but it's actually because they do care, right? That they're measuring those things. They're interested in
their scoreboard, right?
Mm.
And I mean, and that means if it takes resource to move from palm oil, for example, and I mean, some of the things they've invested in, I mean, a traditional business wouldn't necessarily do. They wouldn't justify the cost, perhaps, but they do because they're just measuring success differently, and they're massively profitable. I mean, it is a great case for how when you do these things and when you reduce your environmental impact, you often reduce your costs. Is use less material, use less energy, etc. But that's not why they're doing it. They're not doing it to try to just increase profits. They're doing it because they're playing the infinite game.
Yeah. And the happy result of that is that it actually is profitable. Like that's one of the consequences. What I'd like to do is jump to one of the pages on your website, which is an infographic. And let me pull it up here because it speaks to this part of our conversation, I feel. So why be a for-benefit business? So, and you've got, as I scroll down through this, it says the infographic shares 5 trends that are changing the game of business and proving why leading with purpose is the new path to profit. So as you were speaking about the Dr. Bronner's, what they were measuring and how much they care, it reminds me of when I reviewed this page earlier, because this seems to be so much about the case for doing good actually isn't a detriment to the company, which some people might believe it is. It's going to cost more for us to do good, for instance.
Yeah, and my hope in publishing these statistics is that it inspires those who genuinely care to just take that leap and to go for it. My hesitation in sharing these types of statistics is that people that want to just make more profit are doing it from that place, because I don't think you'll meet these numbers if you're doing it from that place.
Yeah.
It's the energy you're bringing in. It's the culture you're building that is a culture that cares. It's making decisions effortlessly that align with your purpose because you know in yourself it's the right thing to do. I mean, that's how you create these types of results. And
Right.
so it's not a checklist. It's not just, do X, Y, Z and you'll have this type of extraordinary success. It's like, this is a good example. Only 20% of brands worldwide are seen to meaningfully and positively impact people's life, right? 90% of customers are going to boycott if they learn of a company's irresponsible practices. Consumers can sense if you're the real deal, right? I mean, purpose washing is the new greenwashing, and it will be felt through how you show up in your subtle interactions. And so if you want to be part of this other side, 91% of global consumers would switch brands if a different brand of similar pricing quality supported a good cause. Like, I mean, what an opportunity, right? It's saying that there's 80% of brands that have this opportunity that aren't being seen to create a meaningful impact. And 91% of consumers are willing to switch. So it's like, out of those 80% of brands, who are going to be the leaders in different industries that genuinely go through a process I think it's more likely that we'll see new companies take that market share, because the challenge in changing the culture of a lot of these big companies. And we're seeing that, right? We're seeing a lot of the giants fall, and we're seeing new innovative organizations that are built in a different type of culture that really just genuinely care. And it's their mission to preserve that. And these are the organizations that are becoming the new stars.
Mm. Yeah,
And
great.
attracting the talent, right? Like this slide shows.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Top talent, improving employee engagement. Yeah. So what strikes me on this one is that 70% of people consider social and environmental impact when deciding where to work. And I don't know, a generation ago, if people that I don't think that was top of mind at all, even if they were environmental minded. It just seems to be the consciousness is expanded.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And then I think we have got, yeah, one more.
I mean, this case study is great. Purpose-driven companies outperform the S&P 500 by 14-1 in a 15-year study. I mean, that's not just like a slight improvement. I mean, 14 times more profitable than traditional for-profit businesses. This is a study shared in a book called Firms of Endearment.
So I'm curious about something, because you had prefaced our viewing of those statistics with, you don't want to put it up there for the wrong reasons, right? That a company or a leader sees it and says, "Oh, this is the way I can become profitable. This is the way that I can play the game, maybe to my advantage." And yet, if we don't, and people yet will still want, like, show me the proof that it works, right? So how do you reconcile that skepticism of like here the statistics are out there. I mean, the studies have been done proving that doing good is actually good all around. Yet there's this seems like there's this still this really great resistance to believing it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important that we make the business case, and that can become like a strange attractor. And it's also important that we're honest, that to create these types of results, I mean, it's a journey. If you're a large corporation with a really entrenched culture and a really kind of for-profit or profit at all cost way of doing things, to really change the game from one that is for profit or the finite game of win-lose to one that's in the trajectory of an infinite game that's win-win, there's a lot of things to change, and it's worth it. And it means really changing how you treat people, and to really do that from a meaningful way, it's like there's a personal transformation there. And that's why we see these leaders who are like Paul Pullman of Unilever. I mean, he went into a huge organization, but here's a guy that really cares. I mean, and the first thing he did was he let go of over 100 of the top executives. He let go of the culture that didn't align with those values. And he rebuilt the organization to blow their whole field out of the water in terms of their productivity. They became one of the top employers in the world. I mean, on all statistics, from environmental to workers to their sales, I mean, everything dramatically improved. And it was because he came in and built a culture that cared. And he came in leading with that care in everything he did.
And when you talk about like Unilever, so, and in a lot of these stories of these companies, you know, there's a vision from the top, right? They're leadership coming from the top is traditional. How is it that people that are in the middle or at the lower levels can influence up? Is that possible in your experience?
Well, what we're seeing is a shift in traditional hierarchy to models that are often called holacracy, more circular. This doesn't totally get rid of hierarchy. I mean, it's more like nested hierarchy, but what it's doing is it's treating people more like entrepreneurs and employees, where rather than this command and control that keeps people in a place of fear and not really empowering them into their own self-leadership, to this model where, I mean, speaking of oneness, I mean, if we truly believe we are one and we genuinely care for the needs of the other like we care for ourselves, how do you organize your company like that? And books like Reinventing Organizations are phenomenal resources to like give you the case studies of how that's happened across many sizes of organizations, reinventing organizations. And it's phenomenal to see that people are experimenting with models like holacracy that are much more circular than they are pyramid shaped.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when you mentioned holacracy, the big example, really one of the more visible ones that comes up for me is Zappos and Tony Hsieh. And I remember, I sort of vaguely recall when that transition was happening, that he subscribed, he believed in the power of holacracy, yet it was still a decision from the top person to say, we're going to become a holacratic organization, right? So there's, if people at the lower levels, again, are to the extent that they can come together and demand or request, can we become a holacratic organization?
Yeah, Zappos is an interesting case study of this, right? Because they committed to delivering happiness, right? Was their mission.
Right.
And that's not just to their customers, that's to their employees. So how do you build a culture where people are happy? And so this was a strategy aligned with their mission. And I think what it taught the world who were tuned into it was that it takes, again, a level of personal change to stand in your self-leadership, to work within these models. I mean, people are conditioned or traumatized from their childhood to be in this command control relationship where they put themselves lesser, and that might make them feel really safe. So if you take a whole company and you rapidly change it to this model where people are like empowered to stand in their own sovereignty and self-leadership, and it's super scary for people. I mean, there's personal healing that needs to happen for people to actually be able to step up and play at that level. And so this is what we navigate, right? And so I'm fascinated by organizations that are building a culture of people who are living more in surrender. I mean, they're playing the oneness game, and they've done the developmental work, and their company can support them in going further in that developmental work. So they can be a culture where they're more like an organism, and each person is a cell in the organism. And the organism, rather than organization, is helping those cells become more healthy or stay healthy. And then you create a field that creates emergence and allows, in my belief, much more radical creativity, spontaneous collaboration. I mean, Buckminster Fuller spoke about this for decades ago, where it's like, how do you create that radical sense of collaboration and cohesiveness between each party? And I mean, I think this is the great work of our time. And this involves personal change, which then supports organizational change, which then allows for societal change.
Yeah. And you started the program by mentioning how your experience and the experience of your friends going into sort of the typical, old paradigm corporations, and then just not feeling connected and getting burnt out, and just it had no meaning, or whatever it was that was afflicting them. Is that again, a generation ago, 2 generations ago, essentially the attitude would have been, well, you just have to suck it up because this is the way it is, right? And now we're starting to say, this is not the way it has to be anymore.
Yeah.
So with with the folks you knew, like your friends, did they go out? Did they there's obviously some self-awareness happening when you recognize the work I'm doing doesn't have meaning for me, and I need meaning. You know, it's essential. Um, is it a matter of attempting to change things from the inside of the company out, or is it a matter of finding a place where you can feel at home, or is it some mixture of both?
I mean, I think it's a mixture of both. And you certainly see it with the millennial generation, where they're calling for meaning. And by just the sheer demographics, the number of millennials, they're like a soccer ball going through a hose, this huge generation. So that's putting a lot of pressure on organizations to deliver on what they want. If they want to hire that talent, they have to change their culture. And this is where there's a huge struggle, right? Is particularly large corporations trying to figure out how to genuinely create meaning. And they're stuck in a finite win-lose game. So until they start adopting some new game dynamics and changing the game, it's not really going to do it. And that's a big part of my call to business. Is it's not about painting the office cool colors or having a ping pong table or just implementing some practices. It's the underlying game design that actually supports the shift, and that people will feel that there's a different objective here. And that's what's going to be the strange attractor for the talent. Yeah. And so there's both organizations or people that are starting organizations that they're a different game design. And I think those will really take off. And we're going to see blockchain come in, kind of like how the internet came in, and empower a whole new way of doing organization that we haven't quite seen before. And ways of funding organizations that prevent a lot of these win-lose game dynamics, like venture capital funding. And so it's going to be incredible. And it's going to happen from both directions, from within the company and from new organizations being birthed.
Yeah. And when you go, and you mentioned that you go into, or you're invited into big companies now. And when you are, is there a certain translation that happens that when you talk about game changing, right? Do you find that you need to do a certain amount of education and explanation before you can get people to understand that game is how they're playing the game is so essential to how the organization is going to evolve?
So a big part of what I'm doing now is speaking. I mean, I think it's one of the best ways I can create the impact is creating this shift in perspective, right? So until the perspective shift happens, the actions don't change and the results won't follow, right? So step one is helping leaders see that what they're wanting requires a shift, a change of game, which starts with a shift in perspective. And so just them standing in that truth of like, what game are we playing? Okay, this isn't just about making the finite game a little better or creating better benefits for employees. It's actually a larger perspective shift or game change. And then that invites leaders to then go on the journey. And that journey has many stages, and there's many best practices and things to do. But I find where I can have the most impact is by bringing in this perspective shift. And I've been doing that through speaking primarily.
Yeah. And is there sort of a typical audience that you're speaking to? Like, who are they comprised of? And the reason why I'm asking this question is because I'm thinking about, like, on the one hand, you can go out and you can talk to, let's say, executives who, who came up through the old paradigm of business, and they have, the older mindset, and maybe they can be convinced, maybe not, but maybe they're curious. And then you have the millennial generation that does get it. It understands where you're coming from and the language that you're using. And yet I'm also thinking of like in cases of some of the larger companies where there are investors who have an influence, like an activist investor will have an influence on a company, but they're not they're not directly in the organization, right? That's coming from the outside. So is there an aspect of who you're seeking to connect with that are these other stakeholders and literally shareholders, let's say even, that aren't directly involved? And is there hope for those kinds of folks understanding what you're talking about?
So I'm not interested in convincing people. I'm really interested in people who are touched, because that's the energy that will be able to implement what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so how do we touch people in a way that their actions change? And yeah, some organizations are more stuck in certain game dynamics that have been created, such as how they've raised capital or how they've structured their board, or et cetera. But if those people can be touched and they can not feel so in fear because they see the business case, and they can see inspiring examples of organizations playing a different game, my hope is that they can then go on that journey and begin the process of building an organization that is one worth working at, one worth leading, one worth sustaining, because it's good for all life.
Yeah. And I love what you said about you're not looking to convince, you're looking for people who are touched or are open to that, because that language of convincing is sort of implies a win-lose
Right.
kind of battle, right? Like I have to win you over. And is there an example of somebody that you've like that who was touched that maybe even didn't on the surface appear that they would have been? Like, anybody surprise you?
I mean, I'll leave the organization nameless, but a large Fortune 500 organization worked with their senior vice president of corporate affairs, and phenomenal woman, definitely touched. And yet in the dissonance between feeling her heart and wanting this organization to do so much more good, yet not quite understanding how to motivate her team or give them frameworks. And so I come in and I set the perspective, and it gives her a language. She called me her purpose Sherpa, right? Because I was guiding both her into a deeper place of understanding so she could stand more confidently in what she was feeling inside herself, but then also be that mouthpiece for her larger team, and being able to invite them into the perspective shift that she somehow arrived at, but wasn't quite sure how. And so that would be an example.
Yeah, right. Yeah, powerful. And it seems like in a case like that, because you referenced people, changing from within, that there's my interpretation would be that there's a certain amount of vulnerability that somebody has to be at peace with, perhaps, and a certain amount of curiosity that they have to have.
Indeed. I mean, both those are the opposites of ego, right? Mm-hmm. And so if we're moving from ego to spirit or ego to heart, then it's letting go of certainty and control. Which is more vulnerable. It's being open to just taste the other and actually like feel into them, versus kind of stay on your path and stay what you think is true. And so this is, again, why I say I think this is a personal transformation that enables an organizational transformation. And the organizational transformation, if done at the level of game dynamics, like actually invites people into different behaviors. So it becomes a vehicle for personal transformation. It creates a culture where people feel seen and heard and are allowed to be vulnerable. It becomes that like a container of healing and service in its own right.
Yeah, that's powerful, and just really, it just feels like there's so much potential that has yet to be opened up in the realm of business as it evolves into this.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite stories of this is Bob Chapman, who's the CEO of an organization called Barry Waymiller, a large manufacturing organization, multi-billion-dollar organization. And when 2008 hit, they lost a lot of business, and there were people who, in the traditional sense, would be let go of because they just couldn't afford to pay their salaries. And in a win-lose model, that's what you would do. You'd let those people go and not go out of business. But because Bob was touched, because he actually cared, he brought all of his team together, and he shared transparently, with vulnerability and without certainty, with curiosity of, here's where we're at, team, family. How do we navigate this? And just to, rather than going into the long story, it's a beautiful story. Long and short of it is that the people on the team decided to work, to take basically unpaid vacation. And then the team self-organized, because some people couldn't afford to take unpaid vacation, so others took more unpaid vacation. And it all worked out. And can you imagine the sense of family and trust and safety that's enabled when that's the act of leadership, when the employees feel like they're playing not the win-lose game, but the win-win game.
Yeah.
And how they can show up in their commitment, in their curiosity, in their creativity, in the feeling of connection with each other. I mean, it just spawns a completely different culture. And then by 2010, Barry Waymiller had their best year in revenue, and they kept all of those employees. And so, I mean, it's such a great example of how, when you just genuinely care. I mean, Bob's book is called Everybody Matters, for that reason. It's a phenomenal example.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's really, yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, again, a generation ago, the virtue that was, if you could call it a virtue, but what was exalted was, the executive who would come in and slash, right? Slash and burn, and just cut. Yeah. And the irony is like cutting your way to prosperity. And it's really inspiring to hear your story about how there is a higher benevolent way that actually ensures that everyone's taken care of, and that organism of the organization is flourishing.
Yeah.
Wow, powerful stuff. So we'll have time for one more question, and just speak to where GameChangers is at. And like, if you go to your website, you can see a list of all the different companies that you've have in your database. And how are you expecting to continue to track what's happening? Are you evolving the business model for GameChangers to do something beyond that, or more than that? What's in the future of GameChangers?
Yeah. So as I've continued on this journey and recognized the value in helping these leaders, the GameChangers themselves, unite and go deeper together and go deeper in their personal transformation, and then they can come together in a way where they can experiment and support each other in new models of business. And so I feel we need to go beyond just what we could say is more conscious capitalism. I think there's a game change here that enables something that we haven't quite seen before. And we're on this transitionary path, which is great. I mean, all the work that's happening is great. It's a transitionary path. And so what I feel most inspired to now is really supporting that like next stage, the larger commitment to actually change the game design. And that's going to take leaders coming together, loving each other, loving themselves, and starting experimenting with how to do that in a more fundamental way. And so there's that piece. And so I'm looking for the game changers of our time who feel called to reinvent the model of business and to unite those people as a tribe. And I'm doing that through different events and programs. And on the other side, we built what you could say is more like a media organization, where we've got a database you can search through and ways to profile companies and just kind of can continue sharing. And so I've been in the process of exploring partnerships to take on that part. And I'm excited where that's going, so that all of that work can continue to live and grow, because it's a tremendous amount of effort in its own right, and it's better done in the arms of a media organization. And so I've been transitioning that over this last 5 months. Okay. So it's I'm excited. I mean, I feel we're at this moment in history where people are ready in a new way. I mean, even just 3 years ago, I didn't feel the same readiness to be all in for changing the game. Not going halfway, but going all in, because people are recognizing that the global problems like climate change, or fisheries potentially collapsing, or huge populations of refugees causing economies to collapse. I mean, these are all symptoms of accelerating a profit at all cost win-lose model. And so we're having this win-lose game exponentially accelerate, and it's shifting towards lose-lose. So we have this choice where we need to shift from win-lose to win-win before we end up at lose-lose. And so the people with that resource, global leaders recognizing this, what I've been connecting into is this new willingness to shift resources and to shift effort, and to take that bold commitment to look at how do we build a world that is truly win-win, or you could say is even built in oneness. And I think that's the task of our time that people are tasting and ready for in a way like never before. And I'm in full service to that.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and we're grateful that you're doing it, and that it is expanding for you. Altogether appropriate for you to be on this program today, Living in Oneness. And I look forward to following how things go for you. And in particular, because I'm the program director for the Conscious Business Enterprise, and we're doing similar work. So I'm really interested in just seeing how things evolve, and to the extent that we can be a part of that too, I would love to.
Yeah.
How can people get in touch with you if they're feeling led to somehow just connect with you, or just see you speak somewhere, or like what's the best channel?
Sure. I mean, if they feel inspired to connect directly, my email is andrew.h@gamechangers.co. So andrew.h@gamechangers.co. And then, of course, our website, GameChangers.co. There's a link at the bottom where you can join the mailing list. We don't do a lot of mailing, but that keeps you in the loop. And then, of course, on Facebook, you can search Game Changers 500 to find our Facebook group, or me personally, Andrew Hewitt. And I mean, a big part of my work is finding those game changers. So if you're one of them, then do connect.
Yeah, great, Andrew. Well, thanks for being on the program today. This is really inspiring, and just Godspeed and all the things that you're doing. It's absolutely what you're doing is essential, and we're happy you're doing it. So thanks.
It's a pleasure. I mean, we're allies in this mission together, Stephen. So thank you for everything you're doing. It's an honor to be on in this series, and much more to come.
Yeah, and we'll look forward to circling back with you for updates too. I'm hoping, whether it's on this program or something related to what we're doing in Conscious Business Enterprise. So thanks very much.
Indeed.
All right. So with that, let me just mention a few quick things. Humanities Team is an organization that is supported by your contributions. So if you are led to donate to our cause, please go to humanitiesteam.org/donations, and we are very appreciative. And you can also support us through Amazon Smile when you shop there. We also, as I mentioned, I'm the program director for the Conscious Business Enterprise, formerly known as the Conscious Business Initiative. We offer a training and certification program for conscious business change agents, the types of folks that Andrew is coming across in his business, and the people in organizations who are evolving to become conscious professionals. So we would be grateful to have you join our program. cbenterprise.com is where you can find out about that. If we also, Humanities Team is one of 4 organizations that drafted the Conscious Business Declaration. 7 principles of conscious business. You can go to the consciousbussinessdeclaration.org to read that. There's a quick view of it there, and sign it online if you are so moved. And then of course we have for Humanities Team our Oneness declarations, and you can go to humanitiesteam.org, oneness-declarations, if you care to sign one of our general Oneness declarations. And then next up, Barbara Marks Hubbard, 12 Spheres on Governance, coming up next week. And then the week following that, Ross Hostetter, Creating the Good and Knowing What's Best. Ross is a what you might call a conscious attorney, interesting person. So I've had the pleasure of speaking with him about his business. And I think that you will be inspired, of course, by Barbara, which many of you are familiar with, and then invite you to tune in for Ross as well. So with that, thank you very much, everyone, for tuning into this program. And we at Humanities Team will see you next time. Have a beautiful day.